It was one of those quiet Saturday evenings when everything felt calm in the neighborhood. The sun had already dipped below the houses, and the streetlights were starting to glow softly. The air was cool, carrying the faint smell of cut grass. A teenager named Ryan was walking home from basketball practice, his gym bag hanging from one shoulder. He had his earphones in, lost in a mellow tune, and his sneakers made light sounds against the sidewalk. He wasn't thinking about anything serious, just about what his mother might cook for dinner, and whether his team would win next week's game. He had walked this same route many times. It was safe, familiar, and peaceful, but tonight something felt slightly different. When he reached the intersection near the old grocery store, he noticed a police car parked by the curb. He didn't pay much attention at first. He was used to seeing patrol cars around, but as he crossed the street, the headlights flicked on, and the car slowly rolled forward. Ryan pulled out one earphone, wondering if they needed directions or something. The patrol car came closer, and he could see two officers inside. The one in the passenger seat pointed in his direction. The car stopped, and the driver's window rolled down. "Hey, you there," one of the officers called. "Hold up a second." Ryan stopped, blinking under the glare of the car's headlights. "Yes, sir," he said politely, trying to sound calm. His heart started to beat faster, but he didn't know why. "Where are you headed?" the driver asked. "Just walking home," Ryan replied. "I live a few blocks away. Mind telling us where that is?" The officer asked again, his tone firmer now. Ryan told them the name of his street. The officer's expression didn't soften. He exchanged a quick glance with his partner before stepping out of the car. The crunch of his boots on the gravel made Ryan's stomach tighten. He wasn't sure what was happening, but he sensed something wasn't right. "What's in the bag?" the officer asked, nodding at Ryan's duffel. "My basketball stuff," Ryan said. "Jersey, shoes, water bottle." He unzipped the top slightly to show it was just clothes, but the officer raised a hand. "Don't reach in there," he warned sharply. Ryan froze. "Sorry, I was just showing—" "Step back from the bag," the officer interrupted. The second officer got out too, walking slowly around the car. Ryan could feel both sets of eyes on him now. It was just him on the quiet street, standing under a yellow streetlight. He could see a couple of houses nearby, but the curtains were drawn. He wished someone would come outside. The driver spoke again. "We got a call about a suspicious person in the area. You fit the description." Ryan blinked, confused. "A suspicious person? I just came from the gym. I live here," the officer tilted his head. "You got any ID?" "Yes, sir." Ryan reached carefully into his pocket, moving slow so they wouldn't misunderstand. He pulled out his student ID and held it up. The plastic card glinted under the light. "See? That's me." The second officer stepped closer to take a look. "You go to the high school on Main?" "Yes, sir." "Pretty far from here for a walk, isn't it?" the officer said, sounding doubtful. Ryan swallowed hard. "It's only 15 minutes. My mom's car's in the shop." The officers didn't seem convinced. The first one asked more questions: where he played basketball, what team, who his coach was. Ryan answered them all as calmly as he could. But the tone of their voices made him feel small, like no matter what he said, they'd already decided something about him. One of them asked again about the bag. "You sure there's nothing else in there?" Ryan's shoulders stiffened. "Just my sports stuff. You can check if you want." The officer hesitated. The silence stretched. Ryan felt the cool air against his face, heard the faint hum of the car engine, and felt an ache in his chest. He hadn't done anything wrong, but the way they looked at him made him feel guilty anyway. He tried to keep his voice steady. "Is everything okay?" the officer sighed. "We're just checking, kid. There's been some break-ins lately. Gotta be careful." "I understand," Ryan said softly, "but I promise I'm just trying to get home." The second officer glanced down the street, maybe realizing how young he looked, how harmless he seemed. But the first one still looked tense. He told Ryan to keep his hands where they could see them. Ryan obeyed, holding them out slightly, his palms open. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from his mom. "You on your way?" it said. He wanted to reply so she wouldn't worry, but he didn't dare reach for it. "Can I please text my mom?" he asked. "She's waiting for me." The officer shook his head. "Not right now. Keep your hands where they are." Ryan nodded, his mouth dry. He wished his mom could see what was happening. She always told him to stay calm, to be polite, to not argue. He was doing all that, but it still felt like nothing was enough. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours. The street stayed empty except for the flashing lights and the sound of the radio crackling in the patrol car. Ryan could see his reflection in the car window, a scared kid trying to look brave. Finally, the second officer spoke quietly to the first. "Maybe we should just let him go. He's got ID and nothing looks off." But before they could decide, another call came through the radio. The first officer walked back to the car to answer. Ryan could hear fragments of static-filled words but couldn't make out the meaning. When the officer returned, he still looked uncertain. "We're going to need to verify your address, all right? Stay where you are." Ryan nodded even though his legs felt weak. "Yes, sir." As they started typing his name into their onboard computer, Ryan's phone buzzed again. This time it rang. He glanced at it, seeing his mom's name flash across the screen. Instinctively, he took a small step forward, raising his voice so she could hear him. "Mom, put that phone down," the first officer snapped. Startled, Ryan froze, his phone halfway out of his pocket. "It's just my mom. I said put it down." The officer's voice echoed off the houses. Ryan quickly dropped his hand. His pulse raced. He could feel tears burning behind his eyes, but he didn't want to cry. He just wanted to go home. On the other end of the phone, his mother heard the shouting. She recognized the fear in her son's voice, the kind she'd heard in others during her work. Her instincts kicked in. Without wasting a second, she grabbed her jacket and her badge. She didn't even hang up. She just left the call running as she got in her car. Meanwhile, Ryan stood motionless under the streetlight. The officers were still tense, unsure of what to do next. The driver looked at his computer screen, then back at Ryan. "What's your mom's name?" he asked. Ryan hesitated, unsure if answering would help. "Lisa," he said finally. "She works for the government." The officer frowned. "Government? Doing what?" Before Ryan could answer, the faint sound of an engine grew louder down the street. A black SUV turned the corner, headlights sweeping across the pavement. The officers glanced toward it, their hands instinctively near their belts. The SUV slowed, then stopped right behind the patrol car. Ryan's heart lifted when he saw it. He knew that car. His mom's car, but the officers didn't know that yet. Inside the SUV, Lisa's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly for a second before she opened the door. Her face was calm, but her eyes were sharp. She took in the scene in one glance, her son standing still under the light, the two officers watching him, the open patrol car door, the uneasy air between them. Ryan didn't say a word, but the relief on his face told her everything. She stepped forward, holding up her badge. "Evening, officers," she said evenly. "I'm Special Agent Carter with the FBI. That's my son." Both officers froze. The taller one blinked in disbelief. "Ma'am, FBI?" "Yes," she said quietly. "FBI. Now, would either of you like to tell me why you're questioning a minor who's done absolutely nothing wrong?" Neither of them answered right away. The silence stretched again, heavier this time. The second officer opened his mouth, but no words came out. The first one shifted his weight, glancing at his partner, then at Ryan. Lisa walked past them and stood beside her son, her presence calm but commanding. She rested a hand on Ryan's shoulder, steadying him. "You okay?" she asked softly. He nodded, eyes wide. "I didn't do anything, Mom." "I know," she said gently, never taking her eyes off the officers. The street felt different now, quiet but charged, as if the air itself knew something had changed. The officers, who only minutes ago had seemed so sure of themselves, now stood unsure of what to say. Lisa took a slow breath. "We're going to talk about this," she said. "Right now." And as the night settled around them, the tension began to shift, from fear to something stronger, something that neither of those officers had expected when they pulled over a teenager just trying to walk home. The two officers stood frozen for a few seconds, unable to find the right words. The air felt tight and heavy, as if even the night itself was waiting to see what would happen next. The sound of a car driving in the distance broke the silence for a moment, then faded again, leaving only the low hum of the patrol car's engine. Agent Carter kept her hand on her son's shoulder. Her calmness wasn't cold. It was the kind of quiet that came from someone used to control, from years of keeping her emotions steady under pressure. But inside, her heart was beating fast, not from fear but from anger and worry. She had dealt with hundreds of tense situations before, but never one that involved her own child. "Officers," she said evenly, You've got about 30 seconds to explain what exactly happened here. The older officer cleared his throat. Ma'am, we received a call about a suspicious individual in the area. He matched the description we were given, so we stopped him to ask a few questions. Lisa's eyes stayed locked on his. Suspicious individual, she repeated slowly. And what was that description? The officer hesitated. Young male, dark hoodie, walking alone with a bag. That's it? She asked, her tone still calm but sharp enough to cut through the night. The second officer shifted uncomfortably. Yes, ma'am, that's what came through dispatch. Lisa gave a quiet nod. So a teenager walking home from basketball practice in his neighborhood suddenly becomes suspicious? Neither officer answered. The taller one looked down at the ground. The younger one opened his mouth but decided not to speak. Lisa took a small step forward, still keeping her voice measured. Did he resist you? No, ma'am, the first officer said quickly. He was cooperative. Did he threaten you? She asked. No, ma'am. Then why? She continued, her voice low but firm. Was my son standing under a light with both of you treating him like a suspect when the only thing he's guilty of is existing? Her words hung in the air. Ryan watched his mother, feeling both proud and nervous. He had never seen her like this before. Professional, controlled, but burning with quiet strength. The older officer tried to recover. We were just doing our job, Agent Carter. We didn't mean any harm. Lisa folded her arms. Doing your job doesn't mean assuming guilt before you even ask a question. She took a breath and glanced at her son. Ryan, get in the car. He nodded quickly, picking up his bag and walking toward her SUV. As he opened the door, he looked back once at the officers. He didn't say anything, but his eyes said enough. When Lisa turned back to the officers, her voice softened slightly but still carried authority. I've spent 15 years in federal service. I've trained agents on how to de-escalate situations, how to approach citizens, how to read behavior. Do you know the first rule I teach them? The younger officer shook his head. Treat every person like they matter, she said. Because the moment you forget that, you stop protecting the public and then start scaring them. The officers said nothing. The older one nodded stiffly, mumbling something about understanding, but the look on his face showed regret more than confidence. Lisa didn't want to argue anymore. She had said what she needed to say. She took one last look at the scene, the flashing lights, the empty street, the uneasy silence, and then walked back to her car. As she drove away, Ryan sat quietly beside her, staring out the window. The rhythm of the tires on the road filled the silence between them. After a few minutes, he spoke softly. Mom? Yes, baby? Were you mad at them? Lisa sighed. I was mad at the situation, she said gently. At how easily things can go wrong for no reason. Ryan nodded slowly. I didn't do anything wrong. I know you didn't, she said, her voice breaking a little. You handled yourself exactly right. You stayed calm, you were polite. I'm proud of you. He gave a small nod but didn't look away from the window. It just felt like they already decided I was bad before they even talked to me. Lisa's chest tightened. She wanted to tell him that it would never happen again. But she couldn't make that promise. Sometimes people make decisions based on fear, she said quietly. They see something they don't understand, and instead of asking questions, they assume. Ryan turned to look at her. Is that what they did to me? She nodded. Yes, but that doesn't define you. You know who you are, and I know who you are. That's what matters. The rest of the drive home was silent but not empty. There was an unspoken closeness between them, the kind that comes after a storm. When they reached their house, the porch light was on. Ryan climbed out of the car, his bag slung over his shoulder again. The familiar sight of their home made him feel safer, but the memory of the flashing lights still lingered. Inside, Lisa went straight to her desk. She opened her laptop and started typing. Ryan watched her for a moment, curious. What are you doing? He asked. Writing a report, she said. Not as your mom, but as an officer of the law. Ryan walked closer. Are they going to get in trouble? Lisa paused, then shook her head. I'm not out to ruin anyone's life. But there has to be accountability. What happened tonight could have gone very differently if things had escalated. Ryan leaned against the wall, thinking. You think they'll learn from it? I hope so, she said quietly. That's all I can hope for. He nodded, then walked to the kitchen. The clock on the wall showed almost 9. He poured himself a glass of water and took a slow sip, trying to shake off the unease still sitting heavy inside him. Lisa finished typing a few notes, then joined him. "You okay?" she asked again. He nodded, though his eyes said otherwise. "Yeah, just tired." She rested a hand on his shoulder. "You did everything right tonight." "Remember that," he smiled faintly. "Thanks, Mom." Later that night, when Ryan was in bed, he scrolled through his phone. A few of his friends had texted. They had seen part of what happened because someone from the neighborhood had recorded it. One message read, "Bro, your mom's a legend." Another said, "You okay?" "That was crazy," Ryan replied with short answers, not wanting to talk about it too much. He wasn't angry anymore, just thoughtful. He didn't like the idea that people would see the video and think of him as that kid from the cop video. He wanted to be known for his basketball, his grades, his kindness, not for something that scared him. Down the hall, Lisa sat in her room with the TV on low volume. She wasn't really watching. Her mind replayed every moment of the evening. The look on her son's face when she arrived, the officer's hesitation, the feeling of helplessness that had washed over her before she stepped out of her car. She'd seen injustice before, too many times. But seeing it directed toward her own child had hit differently. It was personal now. She picked up her phone and made a call to her supervisor. When he answered, she spoke calmly, explaining what had happened. He listened, then said he'd review the body cam footage once it was available. He promised they'd take it seriously. "Thank you," she said before hanging up. Then she sat there for a while, just listening to the quiet of the house. It was strange. She was used to dealing with major crimes, dangerous situations. But what scared her most tonight was how easily something so ordinary could turn wrong. She went to check on Ryan before going to bed. He was asleep, his phone resting on the pillow beside him. She smiled softly, brushed his hair from his forehead, and whispered, "You're safe now." The next morning, sunlight filled the kitchen. The night before felt like a bad dream, but the emotions were still there, just below the surface. Ryan came downstairs, still sleepy, but smiling when he saw pancakes on the table. Lisa poured him some orange juice. "Big day today," she said, trying to keep her tone light. Ryan sat down. "Yeah, I've got practice again." He hesitated. "Should I walk?" Lisa looked at him carefully. "Do you want me to drive you?" He shrugged. "I'm fine, Mom, really." She studied him for a second, then smiled. "All right. But text me when you get there." "I will," he said. When he left the house, she watched from the window until he turned the corner. She trusted him, but she also couldn't help worrying. Still, she reminded herself, he was strong, and he had handled himself better than most adults would have. At work later that day, Lisa got a call from the precinct. One of the officers from last night wanted to speak with her. She agreed to meet. When she arrived, he looked nervous, holding his hat in his hands. "Agent Carter," he began, "I wanted to apologize for last night. I shouldn't have made assumptions. I realized afterward how it must have looked." Lisa listened quietly. "It takes courage to admit that," she said finally. "I hope you remember it the next time you put on that badge." He nodded, thanking her before walking away. She watched him go, then exhaled slowly. Maybe something good would come from it after all. That night when she got home, Ryan was sitting on the couch doing homework. He looked up as she entered. "Hey, Mom. Hey, sweetheart." "How was practice?" "Good," he said. "Coach said I'm getting faster." Lisa smiled. "See? Nothing keeps you down." He grinned, and for the first time since that night, the heaviness in the house began to lift. What had started as a moment of fear was slowly turning into a lesson. One about strength, dignity, and standing up for what's right. Neither of them knew how far the story would go or who it might inspire, but for now being safe and together was enough, and that, to both of them, was everything. The days after the incident moved slowly for Ryan. At first, he thought things would go back to normal. School, practice, hanging out with friends. But the memory of that night stayed with him like a shadow that wouldn't fade. Every time he saw a patrol car on his way to school, his chest tightened a little. He told himself it was fine, but deep down, the worry sat quietly in the back of his mind. At school, word about what happened had spread faster than he expected. A few people had seen the video online. Someone from the neighborhood had posted it on social media with the caption, "FBI agent mom shows up after police stop her son." Some of his classmates treated him differently after that, not in a bad way, just with a strange mix of curiosity and sympathy. During lunch, a friend asked, "Is it true your mom's with the FBI?" Ryan gave a small smile.
Yeah, man, that's crazy.
"You're like famous now." "I don't want to be," Ryan said quietly. He wasn't trying to sound ungrateful, but he didn't like the attention. He wanted to move on. When he got home that afternoon, his mom was sitting at the kitchen table typing something on her laptop. She looked up as he walked in and smiled. "Hey, champ. How was school?"
Okay,
he said, dropping his bag on the floor. "People won't stop asking about the video." Lisa sighed softly. "I figured it would spread. These things travel fast. I just don't get why people care so much," he said. "It's not like I did anything." She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Sometimes stories like this remind people of what still needs to change. It's not about fame, honey. It's about awareness." He nodded, even though he didn't fully understand. "Did your boss say anything?" "Yes," she said. "They're reviewing the report. The precinct has been ordered to run new training sessions for all field officers." "So, like, they're in trouble?" "Not exactly," she said. "But they're being taught to think before they act." "That's more important." Ryan thought about that for a moment. "Do you think it'll actually help?" Lisa smiled faintly. "It's a start." For a few days, things felt calmer. Ryan focused on schoolwork and basketball. His team was preparing for an upcoming tournament, and he threw himself into practice to keep his mind off everything else. But one afternoon after practice, when he was putting his shoes back into his bag, his coach walked over and sat beside him. "You okay, kid?" the coach asked gently. "Yeah," Ryan said automatically. The coach gave a short laugh. That's what every teenager says when they're definitely not okay. Ryan smiled a little. "I'm fine. Just thinking about stuff," the coach nodded. "I saw the video," he said softly. "It's hard to go through something like that. But you handled yourself well. Not everyone would have stayed calm." Ryan looked down at his sneakers. "I didn't know what else to do." "That's what makes it brave," the coach said. "You didn't lose your cool. That matters." Ryan nodded, appreciating the words more than he could say. Later that night, as he sat in his room, he heard his mom talking on the phone. Her voice was calm but serious. "Yes, I'll attend the meeting tomorrow morning," she said. "We need to make sure this doesn't happen again, to anyone." Ryan could tell from her tone that she wasn't just speaking as a mother now. She was speaking as someone who wanted to make a real change. The next morning, Lisa dressed in her professional suit and headed to a meeting with the local police chief and several department heads. They discussed new policies, community outreach, and how to rebuild trust. She listened carefully, spoke clearly, and made sure her son's experience became more than just another story on the internet. Meanwhile, Ryan stayed home from school that day. His mom had wanted him to rest. He hadn't been sleeping well. He spent the morning sitting on the porch, headphones in, watching people walk by. The world outside looked the same, quiet, ordinary, but he felt different inside. A neighbor walking her dog stopped to wave. "Hey, Ryan," she said kindly. "How are you doing, sweetheart?" "I'm good, thanks," he said, smiling politely. She nodded, her expression gentle. "You and your mom handled yourselves with a lot of grace. The whole neighborhood's proud of you." Ryan didn't know what to say, so he just nodded again. When she walked away, he sighed and looked at the street where it all happened. The spot under the streetlight still looked normal, but he remembered the fear he'd felt there, how small the world had felt in that moment. He picked up his phone and started scrolling. There were hundreds of comments under the video. Some were supportive, others defensive, but one caught his eye. It said, "This kid's mom is a hero, but it shouldn't take an FBI badge for people to be treated fairly." He read that line again and again. It hit him hard. He thought about how many other kids might not have someone like his mom to show up for them. That night, when Lisa came home from her meeting, Ryan was waiting for her in the living room. "How did it go?" he asked. "Better than I expected," she said, setting her bag down. "They agreed to more community meetings, and they want to work with us on better training." Ryan hesitated. "Mom, I've been thinking," Lisa smiled. "That's always a good sign." "What about?" He looked serious. "Maybe I can help somehow. Not with work stuff, maybe at school. Like I could talk about what happened. Or start something that helps people understand what to do when things like that happen." Lisa raised her eyebrows slightly, surprised but proud. That's a big idea. I know, he said, but maybe it could help someone. I don't want anyone else to feel the way I did. Lisa's heart swelled with pride. You're turning pain into purpose, she said softly. That's not easy to do. Over the next few weeks, Ryan worked with a teacher at school to start a student discussion group about respect, communication, and how to stay safe during encounters with authority. They didn't talk about blame. They talked about understanding. Students of all backgrounds showed up, some just curious, others with their own stories to share. The first meeting was awkward at first. Everyone sat quietly, unsure how to start. Ryan took a deep breath and began. I used to think things like this only happened on the news, he said. Then it happened to me. I realized how easy it is for people to misunderstand each other. But I also learned how powerful it is when people actually listen. The room stayed quiet for a few seconds, then one of the students raised her hand and spoke. Slowly, the group opened up. What started as a small idea became something that mattered to a lot of people. Lisa attended one of the meetings a few weeks later, sitting quietly in the back. She watched her son speak with confidence, explaining his story not as a victim, but as someone who wanted change. Her eyes welled with tears, but she blinked them away. She didn't want him to see. She wanted him to feel strong. Afterward, as they walked to the car, she said, "You were amazing in there." Ryan smiled. I was nervous. You didn't show it, she said. You spoke from your heart. That's what people need. Do you think it'll really make a difference? He asked. She nodded. Change doesn't happen all at once. It starts with small steps, and tonight you took one of those steps. As they drove home, the evening sky turned deep orange. The streets were calm again, but now they felt different. Not because they'd changed, but because Ryan had. He wasn't just the kid who had been stopped anymore. He was someone who had turned that moment into a reason to speak up. When they got home, Lisa made tea and sat with him on the couch. You know, she said softly, I used to think my job was only about catching bad people, but lately I've realized it's also about protecting good people from being misunderstood. Ryan looked thoughtful. I think I get that now. They sat quietly for a while, sipping their tea. The house was peaceful again. The air didn't feel heavy anymore. Before heading to bed, Lisa looked out the window. The same streetlight glowed softly at the end of the road. It no longer reminded her of fear. It reminded her of the night her son found his voice. And though she knew there was still work to do, in the city, in the system, in the world, she also knew that something good had started. A conversation, a movement, a change. Because sometimes one night, one person, and one act of courage are enough to make people stop, think, and finally listen. The sound of sirens was gone, but the tension stayed heavy in the air. The teen stood by the patrol car, his hands still slightly shaking even though the officers had already backed off. His mother was there now, strong, calm, and focused. She didn't raise her voice, but every word she spoke carried power. You could see it in the officers' faces. They had realized who she was and what they had just done. The teen's heart was still racing. He tried to breathe normally, but it felt like his chest was tight. His mother stepped closer, placed a hand on his shoulder, and quietly asked if he was okay. He nodded, though his voice didn't come out. He didn't want to cry, but the fear was still too fresh. It wasn't just about the officers pointing at him. It was about how quickly things had turned from ordinary to dangerous. One of the officers tried to speak, his tone softer now. Ma'am, we were just responding to a call. She turned to him, still calm. A call about what exactly? He hesitated. The other officer looked at the ground, avoiding her eyes. There was a report of a break-in nearby. We saw him walking and thought he might match the description. She tilted her head slightly, her voice sharp but controlled. Did you ask for his ID? Yes, but did he refuse to show it? No. Did he have any stolen property, any reason to believe he was involved? Silence. Her eyes didn't waver. Then why was your hand on your weapon? The officer swallowed hard. Ma'am, it wasn't like that. It's just procedure when we're unsure. Procedure? She repeated, the word cutting through the air. Do you stop every young person walking home from practice like this? Or only the ones who look like him? The teen looked down at the pavement, wishing this wasn't happening, but also grateful she was there. He could feel the neighbors watching from their porches and windows. Some were recording, others whispering to each other. The quiet street that had always felt safe now seemed colder, filled with unspoken judgment. His mother took a deep breath, trying to keep her voice steady. She wasn't here just as a parent. She was also an FBI agent who had spent years training officers on how to handle situations like this. But this time, it wasn't a lesson in a classroom. This was real and it was personal. You know, she said, looking directly at them, I train people on how to handle bias, on how to read situations without letting fear or assumption take over. Maybe you need that training again. The officer started to respond, but his partner quietly tugged at his sleeve, signaling him to stay quiet. Her attention turned back to her son. We're leaving, she said softly. Get in the car. The teen nodded, walking toward their black SUV. He felt every step, like each one was carrying the weight of what just happened. He climbed into the passenger seat, closing the door gently. Through the window, he could still see the two officers standing there, looking small under the streetlight. His mother stood by the open door for a moment, watching them. You're going to report this, right? One of them asked weakly, as if hoping she wouldn't. She gave a faint smile, not kind, but professional. Of course I am. You'll have a chance to explain everything to your supervisor. Then she got in the driver's seat and started the engine. The car moved slowly at first, passing the patrol car. Her face was calm, but her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. The teen stared out the window, the streetlights flickering across his face. Neither of them spoke for a while. The silence felt heavy but necessary. Finally, his mother spoke. Are you hurt? He shook his head. No. Did they touch you? No, they just yelled. I didn't do anything. I know, she said softly. You did the right thing. He looked at her. They didn't believe me. No matter what I said, she glanced at him, her eyes softening. They didn't see you. They saw what they expected to see. That's the part that hurts the most. He nodded slowly, turning his gaze back to the road. The lights outside blurred as the car moved forward. After a while, she pulled into a quiet park nearby and stopped the car. She turned off the engine and took a deep breath. I want to talk to you before we go home, she said gently. He nodded. She turned to face him. You know, I've spent years teaching agents and officers how to see people, not suspects. I always believed things were changing. But tonight, her voice trailed off. She looked away for a moment. Tonight I saw how close I came to losing you because someone couldn't see past a hoodie. Her words broke something inside him. He looked at her, his eyes filled with tears he had been holding back. I was scared, Mom, he said quietly. I didn't know what to do. I thought if I said the wrong thing, they'd think I was guilty. She reached out, taking his hand. You did exactly what you should have done. You stayed calm. You stayed alive. That's what matters. He nodded, but his voice shook. It's not fair. No, it isn't, she said, her own eyes glistening. But that's why we keep pushing for change. Not just for you, for everyone who comes after you. They sat in silence again. The night was still around them, and the faint sound of crickets filled the air. For a moment, the world felt peaceful again, even though everything inside them was heavy. Then her phone buzzed. It was a message from her supervisor checking in. She typed back briefly, explaining she'd file a full report in the morning. She didn't want to think about paperwork yet. Right now, she was just a mother trying to help her son breathe again. When they finally reached home, she made him some tea, even though he said he wasn't thirsty. He sat at the kitchen table looking at his hands. They still trembled a little. She leaned on the counter, watching him. You remember when I told you that not everyone wearing a badge understands what it means to protect? She asked. He nodded. Well, now you've seen it. But I also want you to remember that there are good ones out there too. People who wear the badge the right way. Don't let this make you lose trust in everyone. He gave a small, tired smile. You still trust them? I trust the ones who do their job with heart, she said. And I hold accountable the ones who don't. He didn't say anything after that. He just sipped his tea and looked down. She wished she could erase the memory from his mind, but she knew she couldn't. All she could do was show him what strength looked like in the face of pain. Later that night, after he went to bed, she sat in her office writing her report. Each word was careful, factual, but underneath it all was the quiet anger of a mother who had nearly lost her child to bias. She described the stop, the lack of probable cause, the unprofessional conduct, and her direct involvement. She didn't exaggerate. She didn't need to. The truth was powerful enough. When she finished, she saved the document and sat back in her chair. Her hands were still shaking slightly, Not from fear, but from adrenaline finally wearing off. She looked at a photo on her desk, her son smiling in his basketball uniform, holding up a small trophy. That was who he really was. Not a suspect, not a threat, just a kid who worked hard and dreamed big. As she turned off the light, she whispered to herself, "They'll think twice next time." And she meant it. The next morning, she drove her son to school. The ride was quiet again, but this time it felt different. He stared out the window deep in thought, and she let him have his silence. When they reached the gate, he paused before getting out. "Thanks for coming last night," he said softly. She smiled, though her eyes were tired. "There's nowhere else I would have been." He nodded and stepped out. For a moment, she watched him walk toward the building, surrounded by other students who had no idea what he'd been through just hours ago. As she drove away, she felt a quiet determination settle inside her. What happened wasn't just another case. It was a reminder that the fight for fairness wasn't over. She would make sure the system she worked for would learn from it, because no mother, especially one who wore a badge herself, should ever have to prove her child's innocence just to keep him safe. The morning after the incident, the house was quiet. The teen sat at the kitchen table, staring at his bowl of cereal but not really eating. The events of the night before replayed in his mind over and over. The flashing lights, the sharp voices, the cold fear in his chest. It felt unreal, yet it had happened only hours ago. His mother walked in, already dressed for work. Her hair was tied neatly, and her badge hung from a chain around her neck. She looked calm, but her eyes told another story. She hadn't slept much. She had stayed up finishing her report, carefully describing everything that had happened. Every word, every action, every mistake the officers made. "You should eat something," she said softly, pouring herself a cup of coffee. He nodded but didn't move his spoon. "I'm not really hungry." She sat down across from him. "I know." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air was heavy with things neither wanted to say out loud. Finally, she leaned forward. "How are you feeling?" He looked at her, hesitating. "Different. I don't know how to explain it. It's like I don't trust people the same way anymore." She nodded slowly. "That's understandable. But don't let fear change who you are." He gave a weak smile. "You sound like you're still in training mode." That made her chuckle softly. "Maybe I am. It's hard to stop being both an agent and a mom." He looked down again. "I didn't know what to do when they stopped me. I was scared to move, scared to talk, scared not to talk. It felt like nothing I did was going to be right." She reached across the table and took his hand. "You did exactly what you were supposed to. You kept calm. You made it home. That's what matters most." He nodded, but his eyes were wet. "It just shouldn't have to be like that." Her voice softened. "I know. That's why I'm not letting this go." Later that day, she arrived at the police precinct, the same building where the two officers worked. She walked in, greeted the receptionist with quiet professionalism, and asked to see the chief. Everyone in the room seemed to notice her badge, the gold letters, the weight of authority. The chief came out of his office within minutes. He was polite but nervous. "Agent Carter," he said, offering his hand. "I read your report this morning. I was just about to reach out." She didn't shake his hand. Instead, she looked him in the eye. "I'm not here to argue. I'm here because what happened last night shouldn't happen to any child anywhere." He nodded quickly. "You're right. The situation was unacceptable. I've already spoken to both officers. There will be a review." She folded her arms. "A review isn't enough. They need training. Real training, bias awareness, de-escalation, and community engagement. And not the kind that lasts an hour in a meeting room. The kind that changes how they see people." The chief exhaled slowly. "You have my word, we'll take it seriously." "Good," she said firmly. "Because next time it might not end as peacefully as it did last night." The chief nodded again. He looked uncomfortable, but he knew she was right. When she left the building, the afternoon sun hit her face, and for the first time in hours, she allowed herself to breathe deeply. She wasn't just doing this for her son. She was doing it for every parent who feared the same thing happening to their child. Meanwhile, at school, the teen found it hard to focus. The teachers talked, but his mind wandered. He felt people looking at him differently, though they didn't know what had happened. Only one of his close friends knew, and when he asked if he was okay, he just shrugged. How could he explain something like that?